Desperate to find his missing daughter, a millionaire spreads photos around town. In a tense moment, a street kid holds up one of the posters and shouts, "I know where to find her, Daddy." The millionaire's eyes widened, and as he got closer, he saw who the boy really was. The shock he felt would forever change the course of his search and the hidden truth about the disappearance. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, tell us which city you're watching us from, and we'll keep going. The Buenos Aires sky was a vibrant blue on that Sunday morning. Carlos Valente adjusted his sunglasses as he watched his 7-year-old daughter Isabella run happily through the Plaza de las Americas. Her radiant smile and brown braids blowing in the wind gave Carlos a sense of fulfillment that none of his real estate ventures had ever provided. "Don't go too far, Isa," he shouted, sitting on the bench in the square while answering some urgent messages on his cell phone. Carlos Valente, at 42, was the epitome of business success. Owner of the largest real estate development company in Buenos Aires, he collected Entrepreneur of the Year awards and participated in charity events that were featured in magazines. But all his wealth seemed insignificant compared to the treasure. That was his daughter Isabella, especially after his tumultuous divorce from Alejandra 3 years earlier. Shared custody gave Carlos weekends with his daughter, moments he planned meticulously, trying to make up for his absence during a week full of meetings and international travel. He smiled when he saw Isabella waving from the swing, asking him to push her higher. "Just one more important message, Princess. I'm on my way." When he finally put his phone back in his pocket and raised his head, Carlos's heart froze. Isabella was no longer on the swing. His eyes frantically scanned the playground. Nothing. He called her name. Silence. In a matter of seconds, a cold feeling of panic took over his body. "Isabella!" he shouted, running between the toys. "Isabella!" The next few hours became a blur of police sirens, pointed questions, and anguish so intense that Carlos could barely breathe. The square, once colorful, now looked like a black and white scene where he repeated the same steps, remembering the last moments before his daughter disappeared. "Mr. Valente, are you sure you didn't see anything suspicious?" Detective Lopez asked again as he wrote down details in his notebook. "I already told you no. It was just a few minutes of looking at my phone." Carlos ran his hands through his hair, racked with guilt. "Please, you have to find her." While the police began their search, Carlos could not stand still. In his makeshift office in the living room of his penthouse apartment, he began a parallel operation. Using his contacts and resources, he had thousands of posters printed with Isabella's photo, offering a substantial reward for any information. With dark circles under his eyes and a stubble on his face, Carlos roamed the streets of Buenos Aires, pasting posters on lampposts, talking to homeless people, shopkeepers, anyone who might have seen something. The businessman who used to travel only in armored cars now walked through alleys and squares, showing his daughter's photo with trembling hands. "She's my daughter. Only 7 years old. Please, any information." On the third day after his disappearance, when fatigue was already taking over his muscles and hope was beginning to fade, Carlos felt someone tugging lightly on his shirt while he was handing out flyers near the train station. When he turned around, he came across a boy of about 10 years old, with disheveled dark hair and worn-out clothes. "Are you the father of the girl in the poster?" the boy asked, keeping a cautious distance. "Yes." "Did you see her? Do you know?" "Anything?" Carlos quickly crouched down, getting to the boy's level. "Maybe." The boy narrowed his eyes, studying Carlos with a distrust that seemed disproportionate for someone so young. "But I need to know if I can trust you." "Please, she's my daughter. I'll do anything to find her." "Anything?" The boy arched an eyebrow. "Even if it's something difficult?" Carlos felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about, boy? If you know something, you need to tell me now." "My name is Gabriel," the boy said, taking a step back. "And I know where your daughter might be, but I'll only tell you if you help me too." "Help how? What do you want, money?" Gabriel shook his head. "I don't want your money. I want you to find my mother, Renata. She disappeared 3 years ago." Carlos observed the boy, noticing the calluses on his small hands, the look of someone who had grown up too quickly, forced by circumstances. Something about the boy vaguely reminded him of someone, but he couldn't say who. "How can I find your mother if I don't even know who she is? And why do you think I could?" "Because you're rich and powerful. Everyone knows who Carlos Valente is." Gabriel shrugged. "And because I think our stories are connected somehow." At that moment, Carlos's cell phone vibrated. It was Alejandra, his ex-wife, calling for the 10th time that day, probably to ask for updates on Isabella. He ignored the call, focusing on the boy in front of him. "Come with me," Carlos said against all his instincts. "Let's talk about this more." He took Gabriel to a nearby diner. He watched the boy devour a sandwich as if he hadn't eaten in days, while he tried to extract more information about Isabella. But Gabriel was cunning, measuring each word. "First, you have to promise me that you'll help me find my mother," the boy insisted, wiping his mouth with the sleeve of his shirt. "How can I promise something like that? I don't even know if you really know anything about my daughter, or are just stringing me along." Gabriel took a small butterfly-shaped brooch from his pocket. Carlos felt his blood run cold. It was the brooch he had given Isabella on her last birthday. "Where did you get that?" he asked in a choked voice. "I didn't steal it, if that's what you're thinking," Gabriel replied defensively. "I found it near Plaza San Martin 2 days ago, along with—" He hesitated. "Along with other things that make me think I know where your daughter might be." Carlos knew that the police had already checked that area without finding anything. How could this street kid know something that the authorities didn't? "Why should I trust you?" Gabriel stared at Carlos with disconcerting intensity. "Because I too know what it's like to lose someone you love, and because—" his voice trailed off, "because I've been where I think your daughter is now." A heavy silence fell between them. Carlos studied Gabriel's face, trying to decipher whether he was faced with real hope or just cruel manipulation. Something in the boy's gaze, a mixture of pain and resilience, compelled him to believe. "Okay," Carlos finally relented. "I'll help you find your mother, but first I need you to take me to where you think Isabella is." Gabriel shook his head. "It doesn't work like that. First you start helping me, then I'll show you the way." The boy held out his hand, his posture surprisingly adult. "Do we have a deal?" Carlos hesitated. All his business instincts screamed that he was being deceived, that he shouldn't do business with a street urchin. But his father's heart was too desperate to turn down any possibility, no matter how remote. "We have an agreement," he replied, squeezing Gabriel's small hand, without imagining how that simple gesture would change the course of their lives. Forever. Carlos's luxurious penthouse seemed like another planet to Gabriel. The boy walked cautiously through the apartment, as if he were afraid of breaking something just by looking at it. His eyes roamed over the contemporary art, the designer furniture, and the panoramic view of Buenos Aires that opened up through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You can stay in the guest room while we work together," Carlos said, watching the boy's reaction. Gabriel just nodded, keeping his arms crossed defensively. When Carlos showed him the room with its king-size bed and private marble bathroom, the boy looked genuinely confused. "Is that all for me?" "Yes, it's all yours while it's here." Gabriel walked slowly around the room, touching the surfaces, with his fingertips as if testing whether they were real. For a brief moment, Carlos glimpsed the child behind the tough facade, a boy who had probably never had a space of his own. "I need more information about your mother to start looking for her," Carlos said, sitting on the edge of the bed while Gabriel explored the empty closet. "Renata Suarez," the boy replied, keeping his back to Carlos. "She worked as a cleaner in family homes." "And what happened to her? How do you know she disappeared and didn't—" Carlos hesitated, searching for the right words. "If she were gone," Gabriel finished with disconcerting maturity, "I would know. I feel like she's out there somewhere." "I see. And your father?" Gabriel stiffened visibly. "I've never met him. And who took care of you these 3 years?" The boy shrugged. "Myself." Carlos felt a lump in his throat. The idea of a 7-year-old child, the same age as Isabella, Surviving alone on the streets was devastating. Do you have any pictures of her? Anything that might help in the search? Gabriel reached into the back pocket of his worn pants and pulled out a folded, worn photo. In it, a pretty young woman smiled shyly at the camera with a smaller Gabriel at her side. Carlos picked up the photo carefully. Something about Renata's face seemed vaguely familiar, as if he had seen her before. Maybe at some charity event for underprivileged communities. He attended so many as part of his company's public image. I'll scan this and begin the search immediately, he said, standing up. Now it's your turn. I need you to tell me what you know about Isabella. Gabriel sat up in bed, his feet dangling before reaching the floor. There's a house to the edge of town. Missing children are taken there before they're... He paused as if choosing his words. Before they're taken to other places. How do you know that? Carlos asked, feeling a chill. Gabriel's eyes grew distant. Because I've been there. After my mother disappeared. Carlos felt his stomach turn. The idea of Isabella in such a place was unbearable. Can you take me there right now? It's not that simple, Gabriel replied. The place changes from time to time. I need to check it out first, talk to some people, and... He looked Carlos straight in the eye. I need to make sure I can trust you. What do you mean? It's my daughter who's missing. Exactly because of that. You might do something impulsive and ruin everything. Gabriel spoke with surprising coldness. Give me a day. Tomorrow I'll know if she's really there. Carlos wanted to scream, to demand immediate answers, but something in the boy's determined gaze made him back away. If Gabriel was telling the truth, alienating his only lead would be disastrous. One day, not a minute more. While Gabriel took a shower, probably his first with hot water in a long time, Carlos took Renata's photo to his office and scanned it. He began a preliminary search of public databases. Surprisingly, he found very few records, just a work permit issued 6 years earlier and a school enrollment record for Gabriel. It was as if Renata barely existed officially. He decided to call Damian Herrera, his security chief and former police officer, asking for a deeper investigation. He also asked him to verify Gabriel's story, still suspicious of the boy's intentions. When he returned to the room, he found Gabriel standing in front of the wall covered in family photos. The boy looked closely at each image, especially at those of Isabella. She looks nice, Gabriel commented, not taking his eyes off a photo where Isabella was smiling, showing off her missing front teeth. She's amazing, Carlos replied, his voice cracking. Smart, curious, generous. He reached over, picking up a framed photo. This was for her 6th birthday. She insisted on inviting every kid in school, even the ones who never spoke to her. Gabriel lightly touched the image. My mother is like that too. Always helping everyone, even when we barely had anything for ourselves. For a moment, they were both silent, united by the absence of the people they loved. Dinner was an eye-opening experience. Gabriel initially refused to sit at the table with Carlos, preferring to eat standing up near the door, as if planning a quick escape. His table manners betrayed years of living on the streets. He ate hurriedly, shielding his plate with his arm, as if afraid someone might take his food. Carlos tried to start a casual conversation to ease the tension. Did you go to school before, you know? Gabriel chewed slowly before answering. Yes, until 3rd grade I was good at math. And after your mother disappeared, you didn't seek help. Aren't there social workers for these cases? The boy's bitter laugh sounded out of place on someone so young. Social workers, he repeated, dismissively. You really don't know the reality outside your bubble, do you? When you have no money or power, no one cares. You become invisible. The answer hit Carlos like a slap in the face. In his world of multi-million-dollar deals and well-orchestrated charity events, it was easy to believe that the system worked. But here was living proof of its failure. A boy who had to grow up alone on the streets, while he, Carlos, wrote checks to charities and believed he was making a difference. How did you survive all this time? Gabriel shrugged, doing what needed to be done. The tone indicated that the subject was closed. Carlos did not insist, respecting the boy's boundaries. After dinner, Gabriel declined the offer to watch television and retired to his room, closing the door firmly behind him. In the middle of the night, Carlos was awakened by the sound of movement in the kitchen. He found Gabriel preparing a backpack with food from the pantry. "What are you doing?" Carlos asked, turning on the light. Gabriel froze like a cornered animal. "I have to go. I have to talk to some people about your daughter, remember? At 3 in the morning. It's the best time to meet who I need." Carlos considered stopping him. After all, he was just a child, but he was also his only connection to Isabella. "Are you coming back?" The question seemed to surprise Gabriel. "Why would I come back?" "Because we have an agreement, and because here you have a warm bed and food." Gabriel studied Carlos's face, as if searching for signs of deceit. "I'll be back before lunch," he finally replied, "and I'll bring news about your daughter." "Wait." Carlos went to his office and came back with a new cell phone. "Take this. My number is already programmed. If you find out anything, or if you're in danger, call me immediately. Gabriel." Hesitated before accepting the device, carefully placing it in his pocket. "No one has ever worried like this before," he muttered, barely audible, before heading for the door. Carlos watched through the window as Gabriel walked down the deserted street, his small figure soon swallowed by the darkness. A deep anguish consumed him inside. He was placing his hopes in the hands of a child living on the streets, but what else could he do when all other options seemed exhausted? Unable to go back to sleep, Carlos returned to his office and stared at Renata Suarez's photo. The more he looked at it, the more familiar it seemed. A memory was trying to emerge, something important that eluded him every time he tried to capture it. His cell phone vibrated with a message from Damian. "I found something about the boy. We need to talk urgently." Carlos felt his heart race. What had his security chief discovered about Gabriel? And how could this be related to Isabella's disappearance? Damian Herrera's office exuded efficiency. Walls covered in monitors displayed data, maps, and images from security cameras. The former police officer, now head of security for Valente, received Carlos with a serious expression. "What did you find out about the boy?" Carlos asked, dismissing greetings. Damian gestured to a chair and sat down behind his tidy desk. "Gabriel Suarez, age 10. His mother, Renata Suarez, was a cleaner in several family homes in the North Zone." He slid a folder across the desk. "She didn't disappear, Carlos. She passed away 3 years ago." Carlos felt like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "What do you mean? Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I found the birth certificate. Official cause, heart complications." Damian paused. "But there's something strange. There was no investigation. The body was released quickly, and the weirdest thing, there's no record of where Gabriel went after that. No documentation of adoption, foster care, or guardianship." Carlos flipped through the folder, trying to absorb the information. "This means that the system completely failed this boy. He probably ran away before social services found him and has been living on the streets ever since." "But why would he lie about his mother being missing?" Damian crossed his arms. "Maybe it's easier to believe she's alive somewhere than to accept that she's gone. Or maybe—" He hesitated. "Maybe he thinks there's something suspicious about her leaving." Carlos leaned back in his chair, stunned. Had Gabriel been deceiving him this whole time? Or did the boy truly believe his mother was alive? "There's one more thing," Damian continued, opening a file on his computer. "I found a connection between Renata Suarez and an NGO called Manos Unidas, which supposedly worked with underprivileged children. The organization was shut down 2 years ago after allegations of irregularities, but there was never a full investigation. Interestingly, several children who passed through this NGO later disappeared. Do you think this is related to Isabella's disappearance?" Carlos felt a chill run down his spine. "I don't know, but it's a line of investigation. The police haven't explored. And there's something else." Damian seemed hesitant. "Look at this document." Carlos examined the paper Damian handed him. It was a list of donors to the NGO Manos Unidas. Among them, highlighted in yellow, was the name of Carlos Valente, Empreendimentos. "I don't remember that," Carlos stammered. It was approved by their Social Responsibility Department 4 years ago, significant monthly donations for almost a year. Carlos tried to remember. His company supported dozens of charities annually, and he rarely got personally involved with all of them. This could be a coincidence, or it could mean that Gabriel didn't choose you at random, Damian added. Maybe he knew about the connection between you and the organization where your mother worked. Carlos's phone vibrated, a text message from an unknown number. Santa Clara Hospital, come quickly, I found her. It's Gabriel, Carlos said, standing up abruptly. He says he found Isabella at Santa Clara Hospital. Damian frowned. That doesn't make sense. The police would check any unidentified children in hospitals. It doesn't matter, I have to go. Carlos, wait. We don't know if we can trust this kid. But Carlos was already at the door. Keep investigating the NGO and try to find out more about the circumstances of Renata Suarez's departure. Something doesn't add up in this story. Santa Clara Hospital was located in an outlying area of Buenos Aires. Carlos hurriedly parked and ran to the reception, frantically, searching for Gabriel or any sign of Isabella. Charles! The voice came from a side hallway. Gabriel waved discreetly, signaling for Carlos to follow him. The boy seemed even more tense than usual. Where is she? Did you really find her? Gabriel looked around, checking that no one was watching them. Not exactly, but I found someone who can lead us to her. The boy led Carlos to a room at the end of the hallway. On the bed, a girl of approximately 12 years old was lying, with her arm in a cast and visible bruises on her face. This is Luciana, Gabriel introduced quietly. She was in the same place where I believe your daughter is. Carlos looked at the girl in confusion, who returned it with a suspicious look. Who are you? Asked Luciana. My name is Carlos Valente. I'm looking for my daughter, Isabella. The girl's eyes widened in recognition. The new girl? Brown hair, light eyes, a butterfly brooch? Carlos's heart raced. Yes. Have you seen her? Where is she? Luciana exchanged a look with Gabriel before answering. At the house. She arrived a few days ago. What house? Where is it? I need to go there now. It's not that simple, Gabriel interrupted. It's a protected place. It's a trap, Luciana added. If you just show up there, they'll take all. The kid's away. I've seen it happen before. Carlos felt frustration bubble up. So what do you suggest, that I just sit idly by while my daughter is in this place? We need a plan, Gabriel replied with surprising maturity. And we need help from someone on the inside. From inside? Who? Gabriel and Luciana exchanged glances again. A woman, Luciana said finally. She works in the house, but she's not like the others. Sometimes she helps the children. She was the one who helped me escape when I got hurt. What's her name? I don't know her real name. The children call her Aunt Star because of the star necklace she always wears. Carlos felt a shiver. And how did we find this woman? I know where she lives, Gabriel said. I can take us there tonight. Carlos studied the two of them for a moment. He was risking everything on the word of two children he barely knew. But what choice did he have? There's one more thing you need to know, Luciana said hesitantly. About Isabella. What? Is she okay? She's different. When they come to the house, they give the children medicine to calm them down. She might not recognize it right away. Carlos felt his stomach sink. The thought of his daughter drugged and confused was unbearable. We need to get her out of there as soon as possible. That's why we're going to talk to Aunt Star, Gabriel insisted. She's our best chance. As he left the hospital, Carlos noticed a black car parked across the street. As they approached their own vehicle, the driver of the black car started the engine. I think we're being followed, he muttered to Gabriel. The boy looked over discreetly. That's why we need to be careful. They have people everywhere. Who are they, Gabriel? The boy got into Carlos's car before answering. Powerful people. People who make other people disappear. On the way back to the apartment, Gabriel remained silent, watching the rearview mirror closely. The black car kept its distance, but continued to follow them. You didn't tell me your mother was gone, Carlos said finally, deciding to confront the subject. Gabriel stiffened visibly. Who said that? I found the civil registry, Gabriel. I know she passed away 3 years ago. The boy turned his face to the window, hiding his expression. You don't understand. It wasn't natural. They did something to her because she found out the truth about the NGO. What truth? Gabriel continued to stare at the rapidly passing cityscape. Manos Unidas didn't help children. They took them. My mother found out and threatened to report it. Carlos felt a lump in his throat. And you think they shut her up? Gabriel nodded, still not looking at Carlos. And they made it seem natural. No one investigated because no one cares about a cleaning lady without a family. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I needed to know if I could trust you. Gabriel finally turned to face him. Your company donated money to Manos Unidas. I needed to make sure you weren't involved. Carlos felt like he had been punched. Do you think I had anything to do with this? It's my own daughter who's missing. That's exactly why I'm only telling you now, Gabriel replied. It was only after seeing your desperation that I realized you really didn't know anything. When they arrived at the apartment, Carlos noticed the black car parked across the street. Had Damian sent additional security without telling him, or were they the same ones Gabriel feared? Close all the curtains, Gabriel instructed as they entered, and don't answer the phone if you don't know the number. Carlos watched the boy move around the apartment with the caution of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. How had a 10-year-old child acquired such a survival instinct? How do you know so much about these people, Gabriel? What happened to you after your mother left? The boy stopped, his back to Carlos. A heavy silence hung in the air before he answered. They caught me too. I stayed in the house for almost a year, until I managed to escape. My God, Gabriel. Carlos stepped closer, but the boy instinctively backed away. What do they do with the children there? They prepare them, Gabriel replied in a monotone, to be adopted by rich families abroad. Only it's not really adoption. The children have no choice, and the families, they don't really want children. Carlos felt nauseous. And Isabella? She's a newbie. She's still in the adaptation period. We have a small window to get her out of there before... Gabriel didn't finish the sentence. Before what? Before they erase who she is. The boy's eyes finally met Carlos's, revealing an ocean of trauma. Like they tried to do to me. While they waited for nightfall to look for the mysterious aunt, Estrella, Carlos received a call from Damian. I found something about Renata Suarez that you need to see, the security chief said with urgency in his voice. I can't leave now. Can you send it to me? Not over the phone, it's too complicated and possibly dangerous. Carlos glanced at Gabriel, who was watching television with the same watchful gaze as always. I'll try to come by tomorrow morning. After hanging up, his phone vibrated with a message from Alejandra, his ex-wife. I received a strange phone call about Isabella. Call me urgently. The pieces were beginning to fit together, but they were forming a much darker puzzle than Carlos could have imagined. What had Damian discovered, and who had contacted Alejandra? That night, as they prepared to leave, Carlos noticed Gabriel methodically organizing small objects in his pockets, a pocket knife, a lighter, a piece of rope. Where? Did you learn to prepare like that? On the streets, Gabriel replied simply. You learn fast or you don't survive. The boy then took a necklace with a small crucifix from inside his shirt. My mother gave this to me before she left. She said it would protect me. He kissed it briefly before hiding it again. Today we're going to need all the protection we can get. When they finally left, Carlos noticed that the black car had disappeared. Somehow this made him even more uneasy. Gabriel guided him to a humble neighborhood on the outskirts of Buenos Aires, where the simple houses contrasted with the luxury Carlos was accustomed to. This is it, Gabriel said, pointing to a small brick house. Carlos felt his heart race. They were about to meet someone who could finally lead him to Isabella, but also someone who, according to Gabriel, worked for the same people who held his daughter captive. How can we trust her? Carlos asked hesitantly. Gabriel looked at the house with an indescribable expression. Because she has as much to lose as we do if she's found out. And because he paused, as if deciding whether to reveal something important. Because she knew my mother. They worked together at the NGO before everything went wrong. Carlos saw the determination on Gabriel's young face and felt a mixture of admiration and sadness. In just a few days, this boy had become his only hope of finding Isabella, a boy who had lost everything, but still found the strength to help others. "Let's go then," Carlos said, placing his hand on Gabriel's shoulder for the first time, surprised, when the boy didn't flinch. "Let's find this Aunt Star." The small brick house had a tiny but well-kept garden. Roses and daisies bravely resisted the Argentine winter, as did the woman who opened the door after the third knock. "Gabriel?" The surprise in her voice was genuine. Her eyes, however, narrowed as they landed on Carlos. "Who is this man?" "Can we go in, Teresa?" Gabriel asked, looking around nervously. "It's not safe to be out here." Teresa, apparently Aunt Estrella's real name, hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. She appeared to be in her 50s, with grey hair tied back in a simple bun and dark eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "This is Carlos Valente," Gabriel introduced as soon as the door closed. "His daughter is in the house now." Teresa studied Carlos intently. "Valente, the businessman, how did your daughter end up there?" "She disappeared 4 days ago in a square," Carlos replied, trying to read the woman's expression. "Gabriel says you can help us rescue her." Teresa instinctively touched the small star-shaped pendant around her neck. "Gabriel shouldn't be involved in this. He's suffered enough." "I need to help," the boy said firmly. "I know what it's like in there." The woman sighed deeply, indicating that they should sit on the modest sofa in the living room. "What exactly did Gabriel tell you about the house, Mr. Valente?" "That it's a place where missing children are taken, that you prepare them for some kind of illegal adoption." Teresa shook her head. "It's not quite like that. The house is just a way station. The children rarely stay for more than a few weeks. And I'm not one of them. I work there as a cook to try to help the children as much as I can without arousing suspicion." "How does Gabriel know my daughter is there?" "Luciana," Teresa replied. "The girl from the hospital. She managed to escape when they took her to be treated for a broken arm. She described a new baby who matches your daughter." "Why should I believe you?" Carlos asked. "How do I know you're not involved in her disappearance?" Teresa's eyes flashed with a mixture of indignation and sadness. "If I had been involved, Mr. Valente, I would have called my colleagues the moment you knocked on my door." Gabriel nodded. "We can trust her, Carlos. Teresa was my mother's friend. They found out together what really went on at the NGO." Carlos noticed when Teresa shivered at the mention of Renata. There was something there. Guilt, perhaps. "Your daughter is fine. At least physically," Teresa said, avoiding Carlos's direct gaze. "They don't hurt the children, not physically, it's worse." She hesitated. "They break them inside. They erase their memories with drugs, create new identities, train them to forget who they are." Carlos felt his blood run cold. "How long until this happens to Isabella?" "The process has already started, but it takes time. There is still a window of opportunity. Tomorrow there will be a movement at the house. Several children will be transferred. Security will be focused on that. It could be our chance." "How? Would we do it?" Teresa drew a makeshift map on a piece of paper. "The house is here, far from the city. It looks like an elite private school, with discreet but efficient security. There are cameras everywhere except—" She marked a spot on the drawing. "In the service area where we receive food deliveries. The guards trust me. I can distract them for a few minutes while you go in." "And then?" "The children are on the second floor. Isabella is probably in room 7, where they put the new arrivals." Teresa looked at Gabriel. "Do you know the way?" The boy nodded. "I can guide you there and back." Carlos bent over the map, memorizing every detail. "What if we get caught?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "Why are you helping us, Teresa?" Carlos finally asked. "What's in it for you?" The woman touched her star necklace again. Redemption, perhaps. It took me too long to realize what was happening at the NGO. When I finally did, Renata had already... She swallowed hard. It was too late for her. What really happened to Gabriel's mother? Teresa and Gabriel exchanged glances, as if silently deciding how much they could reveal. She discovered documents, Teresa said finally, proof that the NGO was a front for something much bigger. When she threatened to expose everything, they silenced her. They made it seem natural, but it wasn't. And these documents? Renata hid them before she was silenced. She never told me where. Gabriel, who had been unusually silent, finally spoke. You didn't tell him everything, Teresa. The woman gave the boy a warning look, but Gabriel continued. He needs to know who's behind this if we're going to have any chance. Teresa sighed deeply, as if she were about to lift a huge weight. The network behind the disappearances, there are powerful people involved. Politicians, businessmen, judges. They call themselves the Circle. Do you know names? Just rumors. But I know they use legitimate companies to launder the money. Carlos felt a twinge of apprehension. Like what? Teresa seemed to hesitate. Like the New Dawn Foundation, and... She looked directly into Carlos's eyes. And the Social Responsibility Division of Valente Empreendimentos. The shock hit Carlos like a bolt of lightning. That's impossible. I personally verify every partnership. Do you really check, Mr. Valente? Or do you delegate this to people you trust? The question hit a nerve. Carlos rarely got involved in the operational details of the social responsibility area. He trusted Marcos Rodriguez, his director for the sector, for more than 8 years, completely. I need to make some calls, Carlos said, standing up abruptly. Don't use your phone, Teresa warned. They might be monitoring it. Gabriel took a simple prepaid cell phone out of his pocket. Use this one. I bought it today with the money you gave me. Carlos accepted the phone, impressed once again by the boy's prudence. He walked to a corner of the room and called Damian. I need you to investigate Marcos Rodriguez, he said as soon as the security chief answered. Discreetly, look for any connections to a DICE organization called The Circle or the New Dawn Foundation. Carlos, this has to do with what I found out about Renata Suarez, Damian replied, his voice tense. She worked as a cleaner in Rodriguez's office before she went to the NGO. He was the one who recommended her there. Carlos's blood ran cold. Could his own director be involved in the disappearance of children? In the manipulation of company funds to finance a criminal network? There's one more thing, Damian continued. I found an old photo from a company fundraiser about 9 years ago. So what? Renata Suarez was there, not as an employee but as her companion, Carlos. The memory hit Carlos like a tsunami. Renata, of course, the shy girl he had met in a nightclub almost 11 years ago. The brief romance that had lasted only a few weeks before he had returned to Alejandra, then his fiancée. How could he have forgotten? Damian, I need you to do something urgent. When he hung up, Carlos found Gabriel watching him intently. What's wrong? The boy asked suspiciously. Carlos hesitated. The suspicion that had begun to form in his mind was too disturbing. He needed confirmation before he said anything. Nothing, just finalizing the details for tomorrow. Teresa unrolled the makeshift map on the table. Let's go over the plan one more time. Every minute inside the house will be crucial. As Asiod, they discussed the details of the rescue. Carlos couldn't take his eyes off Gabriel. The shape of his chin, the line of his eyebrows, his eyes. How had he not noticed before? How old are you exactly, Gabriel? He asked suddenly, interrupting Teresa's explanation. 10 years and 4 months, the boy replied, confused by the sudden question. Why? 10 years and 4 months. The math was perfect. Carlos felt his heart tighten in his chest. You're welcome, he replied, turning his attention back to the map. We need to focus on rescuing Isabella now. Teresa seemed to have noticed something in Carlos's expression. His eyes showed a silent understanding, perhaps even relief at a secret she would no longer have to carry alone. You should get some rest. Before tomorrow, Teresa suggested. You can stay here tonight. It's safer than going back to your apartment, Mr. Valente. Carlos nodded, grateful for the offer. As Teresa prepared a place for them to sleep, he watched Gabriel sitting silently at the kitchen table, absently fiddling with his crucifix necklace. That necklace, Carlos began, coming closer. Did your mother really say it would protect you? Gabriel nodded. She said that as long as I had him with me, a part of her would always be protecting me. His eyes filled with tears that he quickly tried to hide. Sometimes at night I hold him tight and pretend I can feel her hugging me again. Carlos felt a lump in his throat. He sat down next to the boy, resisting the urge to hug him. Gabriel, if you could make just one wish right now, what would it be? The boy thought for a moment. Find a place where I truly belong. A home. What if? Carlos hesitated, choosing his words carefully. What if you found out you had a family? Someone who didn't know about you, but who, upon finding out, wanted to be a part of your life? Gabriel's eyes widened slightly. Do you know anything about my family? Before Carlos could answer, Teresa returned to the kitchen. All set. You need to sleep. Tomorrow will be a decisive day. As Carlos settled into the makeshift couch, his mind was buzzing with revelations and suspicions. If he was right, it wasn't just Isabella he needed to rescue. It was also the son he never knew he had. Dawn brought a thin mist that enveloped the landscape. Carlos had barely been able to sleep, torn between his anxiety over Isabella's rescue and the overwhelming discovery about Gabriel. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, explaining the familiarity he had felt when he saw the boy for the first time. His son, a son who had grown up on the streets, who had survived unimaginable horrors, while he, Carlos, lived in his penthouse apartment, amassing fortunes and winning Businessman of the Year awards. Guilt consumed him inside. It's time, Teresa said, entering the room with a tray of coffee. You need energy. Gabriel was already awake, methodically organizing some items in his backpack. Ropes, a flashlight, a small pocket knife. Carlos watched. The ease with which the boy prepared himself, like a seasoned soldier, not a 10-year-old child. You don't have to go, Carlos said, approaching the boy. I can do it myself. Gabriel didn't even look up from his task. You'd be lost in there in 5 minutes. I know every hallway, every service staircase. You need me. The determination on the young face was unshakable. Carlos felt a mixture of pride and concern that he only now recognized as paternal. Teresa handed Carlos a small bottle of pills. If Isabella is too sedated, this will help counteract the effects. 1 pill dissolved in water, no more. How do you know so much about the medicines they use? Carlos asked, carefully putting the bottle away. Teresa's gaze darkened. I've learned a lot from trying to help children. Over the years, I don't always succeed. She didn't finish the sentence, but the weight of what was left unsaid hung between them. Carlos's disposable cell phone vibrated with a message from Damian. Confirmed. Test completed. 99.8% compatibility. Although he had already suspected it, the scientific confirmation of the DNA test made Carlos feel momentarily dizzy. Gabriel was really his biological son. Is everything okay? Gabriel asked, noticing the change in Carlos's expression. Yeah, just nervous about the rescue. Teresa glanced at her watch. The supply shipment arrives at 8:30. I need to be there to greet it. You will follow me discreetly and enter when I distract the guards. She handed Carlos a service uniform and a badge. This should help. You move around without arousing immediate suspicion. What about me? Asked Gabriel. You're small enough to go unnoticed if you're careful. Teresa adjusted the boy's shirt collar. Besides, you know the camera's blind spots better than I do. The drive to the house was made in absolute silence. Teresa drove while Carlos and Gabriel remained crouched in the back seat, invisible to any casual observer. Carlos felt his heart hammering against his chest. He was about to face the people who had kidnapped his daughter, possibly the same people who had silenced Gabriel's mother, the woman he had briefly met years ago and forgotten, leaving behind a son he never knew existed. As Teresa's car pulled up, Carlos peered out the window. The house looked nothing like the sinister den he had imagined. It was an elegant estate, with the appearance of an elite private school, surrounded by a high but discreet wall. Guards patrolled the perimeter, but they wore uniforms that looked more like those of a corporate security guard than a criminal. Organization. "Remember," Teresa whispered before getting out of the car, "you have at most 20 minutes before the guard shift change begins. If you're not back by then, I won't be able to help you." Carlos nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. It wasn't just Isabella he needed to rescue now, it was also Gabriel he couldn't leave behind. "Ready?" asked Teresa. "Ready," they replied in unison. The plan worked with surprising precision at first. Teresa distracted the guards at the service entrance, while Carlos and Gabriel slipped in through a side door. Once inside, Gabriel took the lead, guiding Carlos through side hallways and seldom-used stairwells. "Keep your head down," the boy instructed in a whisper, "and act like you belong there. Most of the maintenance staff are invisible to them." Carlos followed the instructions, impressed by his son's maturity and tactical intelligence. As they walked through the hallways, he could see how the place worked. Rooms that looked like classrooms, but with locked doors. Employees in white coats moving around with clipboards. At first glance, it could really pass for a legitimate educational institution. "This way," Gabriel said, pointing to a side staircase. "The bedrooms are on the second floor." When they reached the dormitory hallway, Gabriel suddenly became tense. "What's wrong?" whispered Carlos. "Something's wrong," the boy replied. "There should be more movement today because of the transfers. It's too quiet." Carlos felt a chill. "Do you think it's a trap?" "I don't know. But we have no choice. Isabella's room is the third one on the right." They moved cautiously down the silent hallway. Carlos could feel his heart in his throat as Gabriel counted the doors. "It's here," the boy said finally. The door wasn't locked, which immediately heightened the feeling that something was wrong. Carlos pushed it open slowly, preparing for the worst. The room was empty. "No," Carlos muttered, feeling panic rising. "Where is she?" Gabriel quickly scanned the room. The bed was made. The small closet was half open, revealing a few pieces of clothing. "Someone's been here recently," he said, pointing to a still full glass of water on the bedside table. "They couldn't have gone far." "Maybe they started the transfers earlier," Carlos suggested, trying to control the desperation in his voice. Gabriel shook his head. "Something's not right." He walked over to the small closet and examined the clothes. "These aren't hers. They're General House uniforms." Carlos noticed something under the bed, a small, partially visible object. He bent down to pick it up and felt his blood run cold. It was Isabella's butterfly brooch, the same one Gabriel had shown him on their first meeting. "She was here," he said, showing Gabriel the brooch. "We need to find her fast." A noise in the hallway alerted them. Footsteps approaching. Gabriel pulled Carlos behind the door just as it opened again. A woman in a white lab coat walked in, carrying a clipboard. Before she could react to their presence, Carlos stepped forward and clamped his hand over her mouth, pushing her into the room. "Where is my daughter?" he demanded in a low but firm voice. "Isabella Valente. Where is she?" The woman's eyes widened in recognition of the name. When Carlos slightly loosened his grip on her mouth, she spoke quickly. "They moved her room this morning. They knew. Someone was coming to get her." Carlos's heart raced. "How did you find out?" "I don't know," the woman replied, visibly frightened. "I only know that there has been a sudden change in plans. Several children have been transferred to another ward, including your daughter." "Which wing?" Gabriel interjected. "East wing, third floor, but there's no point going there. Security has been beefed up." "How did we get there without being seen?" asked Carlos. The woman hesitated. Gabriel stepped forward, staring at her intently. "We're talking about innocent children," the boy said. "Do you really want to be a part of this?" Something in Gabriel's gaze seemed to strike a chord with the woman. She sighed deeply. "There's a service passage at the end of this hallway behind the cleaning closet. It leads straight to the third floor of the East Wing." "And how do we know you're not sending us into a trap?" Carlos asked. "Because I have a son her age," the woman replied, her eyes suddenly brimming with tears. "And every night when I look at him, I wonder how I ever got to work here." Carlos studied her face for a moment, deciding to trust his instincts. If you help us now, I promise that when this is all over, you won't be implicated. The woman nodded. The locker isn't locked. There's a false panel at the back. But you'll need to be quick. Shift change starts in... She checked her watch. Less than 10 minutes. Gabriel was already at the door, checking the hallway. It's clear, let's go. Before following the boy, Carlos turned to the woman. How is she? My daughter. Confused. The medications, but she still remembers things. Still asks about her. Father. Carlos felt a tightness in his chest. Thank you. They ran down the empty hallway until they found the cleaning closet. As promised, there was a removable panel at the back, revealing a narrow passage used for maintenance. I'll go first, Gabriel said, squeezing into the tight space. The passageway was claustrophobic, just pipes, electrical wiring, and dust. Carlos twisted to keep up with Gabriel, who moved with the agility of someone who had navigated tight spaces before. How did they know we were coming? Carlos whispered. Gabriel didn't respond immediately, focused on following the right path. Someone must have betrayed us, he said finally, or they followed us to Teresa's house. Suspicion hung between them like a dark cloud. Had they fallen into an elaborate trap? We're here, Gabriel announced, stopping before another opening. This should give access to the supply depot on the 3rd floor. Carefully, he pushed the panel open without resistance. They found themselves in a small storage room filled with boxes and medical supplies. Gabriel motioned for Carlos to follow him silently. The special rooms are at the end of the hall, the boy whispered. She's probably in one of them. When they left the warehouse, they found themselves in a hallway that was more refined than the others, with marble floors and pastel-colored walls. It looked more like a luxury clinic than a child detention center. Security cameras monitored every angle. How do we get past the cameras? Carlos asked, instinctively stepping back. Gabriel pointed to a series of pipes in the ceiling. Above, the ventilation shafts are wide enough. With impressive agility, the boy pulled up a chair, climbed on it, and removed one of the false ceiling panels, revealing enough space for them to crawl across the corridor. You first, Gabriel indicated. I'll close the entrance. Inside the ventilation duct, the dust and thin air made it difficult to breathe. Carlos followed Gabriel's whispered instructions, who counted the exits. 3rd on the right, here. Through the ventilation grate, Carlos could see a room more sophisticated than the previous one. A small hospital bed, monitoring equipment. Hand sitting in a chair by the window, a small familiar figure. Isabella. The emotion almost made Carlos scream, but Gabriel quickly covered his mouth with his hand. Be careful, the boy warned. There might be someone watching. Carefully, they removed the ventilation grate and prepared to descend. Carlos was the first, landing silently on the carpeted floor. Isabella turned when she heard the noise. For a terrible moment, Carlos feared she didn't recognize him. Her eyes were distant, almost glassy, and her expression was one of confusion. She wore a simple white uniform, and her hair, usually tied in elaborate braids, fell untidy over her shoulders. Isa, Carlos called softly, coming closer. It's me, Daddy. The girl blinked several times, as if trying to adjust her focus. Daddy. Her voice sounded weak, hesitant. Yes, Princess, I came to get you. Let's go home. A flash of recognition lit Isabella's eyes. Daddy! She tried to stand, but her legs felt too weak. Carlos ran to hug her, feeling hot tears streaming down. His face. It's okay now, my love, I'm here. Gabriel, who had come down next, remained vigilant near the door. We need to be quick, he warned. We have less than 5 minutes before shift change. Carlos nodded, pulling out the bottle Teresa had given him. He quickly dissolved a pill in a glass of water on the bedside table. Drink this, Isa. It will help you feel better. The girl obeyed without question. Within moments, her eyes seemed to come to life, the medicinal haze beginning to dissipate. They said you wouldn't come, Isabella murmured, clinging to her father. They said you had abandoned me. Never, Carlos promised, his voice breaking. I would never abandon you. Gabriel interrupted the moment. We have to go now. Carlos lifted Isabella into his arms. The girl was lighter than he remembered, weakened by the days of captivity. When he turned around, he noticed that Gabriel was watching the scene with an indescribable expression, a mixture of relief and deep sadness. "Shall we go the same way we came in?" asked Carlos. Gabriel shook his head. "Too risky with her. We need another route." The boy carefully opened the bedroom door, checking the hallway. "Clear for now. There's an emergency staircase at the end of the hallway on the left." They moved. Forward quickly, Carlos carrying Isabella while Gabriel led the way. They were almost reaching the stairs when an alarm began to sound. "Damn it!" Gabriel exclaimed. "Someone noticed she was missing." "What do we do now?" "We run." They sped down the emergency stairs, hearing doors opening and raised voices on the upper floors. On the second floor, Gabriel pulled them into a side hallway. "This way. There's a back exit that leads to the garden." As they ran, Isabella clung tightly to her father's neck, her eyes now completely alert and full of fear. "Daddy, who is that boy?" she asked. "Someone very special," Carlos replied, unable to elaborate in that moment of extreme tension. "He's helping us escape." They reached a door that led to an outside area. Gabriel pushed it open, but it was locked. "Stand back," the boy ordered, pulling something from his pocket. With surprising dexterity, he manipulated the lock with what looked like a bent wire. Within seconds, the door swung open. "Where did you learn that?" asked Carlos, impressed. "On the streets. Let's go." The garden was large and well kept, with trees and shrubs providing some cover. In the distance they could see the outer wall, and beyond it, the outside world, freedom. "How do we get past the wall?" asked Carlos, noticing the formidable height of the barrier. "There's a tree over there," Gabriel pointed out. "The branches go over the wall. I've used that route before." They ran crouched, using the vegetation as camouflage. The alarm continued to sound, and now they could hear voices and hurried footsteps through the garden. "They're spreading out to look for us," Gabriel warned. "We need to move faster." When they reached the indicated tree, Carlos realized the challenge, how to climb it carrying Isabella. "I can climb it by myself, Daddy," the girl said, as if reading his thoughts. The effects of Teresa's pill seemed to have worked completely, restoring the girl's energy and lucidity. "Are you sure, Princess?" Isabella nodded firmly. "I'm good at climbing. Just help me get started." Gabriel had already started climbing, moving with the naturalness of someone who grew up exploring every possible corner to survive. He reached out his hand to help Isabella. "Hold on tight," the boy instructed. "One foot at a time." Carlos watched, his heart in his throat, as the two of them climbed the tree. It was surreal to see these two children, his two children, he realized with a lump in his throat, working together to escape. When they reached the branch that crossed the wall, they heard shouts closer. The guards had found their trail. "Go, Carlos, quickly!" called Gabriel from the top of the tree. Carlos began to climb, every muscle in his body protesting. Years of corporate comfort had not prepared him for this kind of physical exertion. Still, adrenaline and the desperation to save the children drove his movements. When she reached the main branch, she saw Gabriel helping Isabella cross to the other side of the wall. The girl moved with determination, despite her evident exhaustion. "You can do it, Isa," Gabriel encouraged. A few more steps. A shot rang through the air, hitting the tree, trunk inches below where they stood. Carlos froze momentarily. "Come on!" Gabriel shouted. "We don't have time." Carlos scrambled along the branch, keeping his balance precariously. Below them, armed guards were approaching quickly. "Stop! Immediately!" ordered an authoritative voice. When they finally reached the other side of the wall, they saw Teresa, waiting with her car a few meters away. The woman was frantically waving for them to hurry up. "Run!" she shouted. "Don't look back!" Gabriel took Isabella's hand and pulled her toward the vehicle. Carlos followed them, protecting the rear. More shots rang out, but now they were protected by the wall. They got into the car in a frenzy of desperate movements. Teresa accelerated before the back door was even completely closed. "Did we make it?" she asked, looking in the rearview mirror. "Is everyone okay?" "Yes," Carlos replied, hugging Isabella as he tried to normalize his breathing. "Thanks to you, and Gabriel." Gabriel, sitting on the other side of Isabella, kept his eyes fixed on the rear window, checking to see if they were being followed. "We need to change cars," the boy said. "They know this one." Teresa nodded. "I've thought about it. I have a friend a few miles away. We can trade there." As the car sped away from the house, Carlos could finally absorb the reality of what they had just done. They had challenged a powerful and shadowy organization. Repercussions were inevitable. "What happens now?" Gabriel asked, finally relaxing a little in his seat. Carlos looked at the boy, his son, as confirmed by the DNA test, and at Isabella, who now rested her head on his shoulder, exhausted but safe. "Now," he replied with renewed determination, "we will bring them all to justice." Isabella fell asleep in her father's arms, the adrenaline rush giving way to exhaustion. Gabriel remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the path behind them. "Gabriel," Carlos called softly, "we need to talk when this all calms down." The boy turned his keen eyes to Carlos. "About what?" "About your future, about your family." Gabriel studied Carlos's face for a long moment, as if trying to decipher a complex code. "You found out, didn't you?" he asked finally in a low voice. "About me, about my mother?" Carlos nodded, feeling the weight of that unspoken truth between them. "Yes." The boy looked away, staring at the landscape that passed quickly by the window. "What now?" "Now," Carlos replied, reaching out with his free hand to touch Gabriel's shoulder, "we start over. As a family." Gabriel didn't answer, but Carlos could see the glint of tears in the boy's eyes. It was just the beginning of a journey that would be long and difficult, but for the first time in days, Carlos felt something close to hope. Teresa's chosen retreat was a small farm on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. It belonged to her brother Miguel, who traveled frequently for work, leaving the property empty for long periods of time. The place was perfect, secluded enough to not attract attention, but with all the necessary amenities. "You can stay here as long as you need," Teresa said as she showed them the rooms. "Miguel won't be back for 2 weeks." Carlos thanked her, carrying the sleeping Isabella in his arms. The girl had not woken up during the entire journey, her fragile body finally giving in to exhaustion after the traumatic days in captivity. "I'll put her to bed," he said, heading for the room Teresa had indicated. Gabriel remained in the room, still vigilant, his eyes scanning every window and door as if assessing escape routes. "You should rest too," Teresa suggested to the boy. "You were very brave today." Gabriel shrugged, uncomfortable with the compliment. "I'm used to it. No child should be used to what you've been through," Teresa replied, lightly touching his shoulder. "I'll make you something to eat." When Carlos returned to the living room, he found Gabriel sitting at the kitchen table watching Teresa make sandwiches. "Is Isabella okay?" the boy asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes, sleeping soundly. The doctor Teresa contacted will come and examine her tomorrow morning." Carlos sat next to Gabriel, feeling the weight of the unspoken words between them. How could he tell a boy who had grown up on the streets, who had faced abandonment and unspeakable trauma, that his biological father had been by his side the whole time? "What are you thinking?" Gabriel asked, surprising Carlos with his insight. "How? Life takes incredible turns," he answered honestly. "A week ago I was desperately looking for Isabella, believing I had only one daughter in the world." Gabriel stiffened visibly. "And now he's discovered he has a son he never knew about." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Carlos felt his heart race. You knew?" The boy kept his eyes fixed on the table. "I wasn't sure. My mother never wanted to talk about my father. She just said he didn't know I existed, that he had another family." He looked up, looking directly at Carlos. "But when I saw your picture in the papers, I recognized something familiar. And when we met, I was almost certain. Why didn't you say anything?" "What would I say?" "Hi, I guess I'm your bastard son." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Besides, I needed to make sure I could trust you. Teresa placed the sandwiches on the table and discreetly retreated to another room, giving them privacy. "Understand why your mother never reached out to me," Carlos said after a moment. "At the time I had just gotten engaged to Alejandra, was building my company. Renata must have thought I would reject you both." "And would have rejected it?" Gabriel's gaze was intense, challenging. Carlos thought for a moment, wanting to be completely honest. The Carlos from 10 years ago, maybe? I was ambitious, selfish, and only thought about my own success. He sighed deeply. "But we'll never know because I didn't have a chance to choose. Your mother made that decision for me, and for you." "She did what she thought was best," Gabriel defended, his loyalty to his mother evident in his protective stance. "Yes, he probably did." "And now," Carlos hesitated, aware of the weight of his next words, "now I have the chance to do what's right, if you want me to." Gabriel studied Carlos's face with disconcerting intensity. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means I want you in my life, Gabriel, as my son, legally, officially." The boy looked genuinely surprised, as if he hadn't considered this possibility. "And Isabella? What will she think of this? And your ex-wife?" "Isabella always wanted a brother," Carlos replied with a soft smile. "As for Alejandra, she's a good person. You'll understand." Gabriel picked up a sandwich but just twirled it between his fingers, not eating. "People like you don't adopt street kids like me. That's not how the world works." "I wouldn't be adopting a street kid," Carlos corrected gently. "I'd be acknowledging my own son." Before Gabriel could respond, they heard a small voice coming from the kitchen entrance. "Daddy?" Isabella stood in the doorway, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She looked disoriented, but her eyes were clearer than when they had found her. "In the house?" "Hey, princess." Carlos stood up immediately, going over to her. "You should be sleeping." "I had a nightmare," the girl replied, clinging to her father's leg. "I thought I was still in that place." "It's okay now," Carlos assured her, stroking her hair. "We're safe here." Isabella looked at Gabriel, who remained, seated at the table, clearly uncomfortable. "You're the boy who helped my father find me," she said, surprising them both with her lucidity. Gabriel nodded, unsure of how to interact with the child. "Gabriel." "Thank you, Gabriel." She approached timidly. "I was so scared back there." The boy seemed taken aback by the thanks. "It was nothing," he muttered. "Did you escape from that place too?" Isabella asked, sitting down next to him at the table. "There were other children there. They gave us medicine that made us confused." Gabriel exchanged a look with Carlos, hesitant about how much they should let Isabella talk about the recent trauma. "Yes, I escaped," he finally answered. "A long time ago." "You are very brave," said Isabella, with the genuine admiration that only children can express. Then, turning to her father, "Can he come live with us? I've always wanted a brother." Carlos froze, taken aback by the direct question. Gabriel stared at his own sandwich, as if it were suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. "Actually, Isa." Carlos took a deep breath, deciding this was the perfect time. "Gabriel isn't just a friend who helped us. He's your brother?" Isabella's eyes widened, first in confusion, then in pure joy. "My brother, really? How is that possible?" "It's a complicated story, Princess. I'll tell you everything, but the important thing is that Gabriel is my son, just as you are my daughter." "Half-brother, technically," Gabriel corrected quietly. "Brother," Carlos insisted firmly. Isabella studied Gabriel for a moment, with the analytical intensity she had inherited from her father. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around the boy's neck, hugging him tightly. "I knew it. I knew you looked like Daddy. You have the same eyes." Gabriel stiffened at the unexpected physical contact, his arms remaining motionless at his sides. Slowly, however, Carlos could see the boy's shoulders relax and one of his arms hesitantly lift to return the embrace. "Don't be sad," Isabella continued, misinterpreting Gabriel's hesitation. "Being a daddy's daughter is very nice. He tells bedtime stories and makes pancakes on Sundays." A small involuntary smile appeared at the corner of Gabriel's mouth, perhaps the first one Carlos had seen since he had met him. "It looks nice," the boy replied. "But right now you two need to eat and rest," Carlos intervened, noticing the exhaustion in both of them. "We have plenty of time to talk later." Teresa, who had quietly returned to the kitchen, smiled as she observed the scene. "Would you like to sleep in the same room as your brother, Isabella? There are 2 beds there." To everyone's surprise, it was Gabriel who answered. "I think that would be good. That way I can keep an eye on her." The night passed, peacefully in the rural refuge. Carlos remained awake, keeping watch, while Teresa slept on the sofa in the living room. Isabella and Gabriel shared the room. The girl fell asleep quickly, but Carlos suspected that Gabriel was also keeping watch, despite his evident tiredness. At dawn, Carlos's disposable cell phone vibrated with a message from Damian. "I found the documents, concrete evidence against Rodriguez and others. Where can I find them?" Carlos hesitated. He had trusted Damian for years, but after everything he had learned in the last few days, he knew he needed to be cautious. He consulted Teresa before answering. "Can we trust him?" he asked. Teresa thought for a moment. "If in doubt, suggest a public place. See if he comes alone." Following his advice, Carlos arranged to meet at a busy cafe in downtown Buenos Aires that afternoon. Damian immediately agreed. When the children woke up, Carlos was surprised to find them chatting animatedly. Isabella talked about her school and her friends, while Gabriel listened with genuine curiosity, as if he were seeing a world completely different from his own. Teresa's doctor friend arrived shortly after. After examining Isabella thoroughly, he confirmed that she was physically fine. The medications administered in captivity were being eliminated naturally from her system, but the psychological effects could last longer. "She will need therapeutic support," the doctor warned. "Traumas like this don't go away on their own." Isabella, sitting on her father's lap during the examination, looked at Gabriel. "Did you also see doctors after you ran away?" Gabriel shook his head. "There was no one to take me." The doctor studied Gabriel with professional concern. This young man would need a complete checkup as well. "I'm fine," Gabriel protested, backing away. "Please," Carlos said, "it's important to check on your health." Then, more quietly, just for Gabriel to... "Here, I want to take care of you now, son." The word son seemed to hit Gabriel like a bolt of lightning. For a moment, the boy just stared at Carlos, a storm of emotions crossing his face. Finally, he nodded slightly. During Gabriel's examination, Carlos took Teresa aside. "I need to go meet Damian this afternoon. Will you stay with the kids?" Teresa agreed. "But be careful. We don't yet know how far this organization's reach goes." "I thought of something during the night," Carlos continued. "If Renata worked for Marcos Rodriguez at the company, maybe he purposely sent her to the NGO after he found out about her pregnancy, to monitor her or silence her." Teresa visibly shuddered. "It's possible. Renata showed up at the NGO, recommended by someone powerful. I never found out who exactly. He said it was her big opportunity to improve her life." Guilt hit Carlos like an avalanche. While he was building his empire and living his comfortable life with Alejandra and then Isabella, Renata and Gabriel had been manipulated, used and discarded by people who worked for him under his name. "I will dismantle this entire network," Carlos promised, determination evident in every word, "and I will compensate Gabriel for everything he has lost." "Some losses cannot be made up for," Teresa replied gently. "But you can give him a different future." Later, when the doctor finished examining Gabriel and left with Teresa to get some medicine, Carlos found the children on the porch. Isabella had found a country cat and was trying to convince Gabriel to pet it. "Look, he likes you," she insisted. As the feline rubbed against the reluctant boy's legs. Gabriel kept his hands in his pockets, but Carlos could see his interest in the animal. "I've never had a pet," the boy admitted. "We can adopt one when we get home." Isabella clapped her hands excitedly. "A cat for you and a dog for me." "Isabella," Gabriel began hesitantly. You know I don't. I mean, we haven't decided yet if... Are you going to live with us? The girl finished, frowning. But you have to come, you're my brother. Carlos watched the interaction with a heavy heart. The simplicity of the childish logic. Gabriel is my brother, so he should live with us, contrasted with the complexity of the real situation. A traumatized boy, accustomed to forced independence, suddenly introduced to a family he never knew existed. Isabella, Carlos interjected softly, we need to give Gabriel time. It's an important decision. But Daddy, it's okay, Isa, Gabriel interrupted, using the nickname for the first time. I just need to get used to the idea. Isabella studied her newfound brother's face. Are you afraid? The direct question caught Gabriel off guard. Me? Afraid? Of course not. It's okay to be scared, Isabella continued with wisdom beyond her years. I am too sometimes, especially after that place. Gabriel looked down. It's not really fear, it's more not knowing if I'll fit in, if I'll be able to be normal. Carlos felt his heart break at the vulnerability in his son's words. Before he could intervene, Isabella took Gabriel's hands in hers. You don't have to be normal. You just have to be you. Something about the simplicity of those words seemed to strike Gabriel deeply. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, and Carlos could see the carefully constructed barriers begin to crumble. I need to go take care of some important things in the city, Carlos announced, sensing that his brothers needed this moment together. Teresa will stay with you until I get back, which shouldn't be long. Stay inside, okay? Isabella ran to hug her father. You'll be back soon, right? Promise? I promise, Princess. Carlos kissed the top of her head. Then, looking at Gabriel, take care of your sister for me. The boy nodded, responsibility seeming to give him purpose. No one will hurt her again. Carlos walked over and carefully placed his hand on Gabriel's shoulder. Thank you, son. This time Gabriel did, not flinch from the touch. His eyes, so similar to Carlos's, reflected a complex mix of emotions, distrust and hope, fear and longing, all at the same time. Come back soon, father, he said, the word sounding strange on his lips, as if he were testing what it would feel like to use. Carlos felt a lump in his throat. It was just one word, but it represented the beginning of a bridge over the abyss that had separated them for 10 years. A fragile bridge, newly built, but with the potential to become something strong and lasting. I'll be back, he promised, holding Gabriel's gaze. For both of you. The cafe in downtown Buenos Aires was bustling with activity that afternoon. Carlos chose a strategic table from which he could see the entrances and exits, a new habit he had acquired after the events of the past few days. His eyes constantly scanned the room, looking for suspicious faces or strange behavior. Damian arrived punctually, alone as agreed. His expression was serious as he sat across from Carlos. Are you guys okay? He asked immediately. Is Isabella safe? Yes, Carlos replied, still cautious. We managed to rescue her. Thank God. Damian's relief seemed genuine. Did the boy help? Carlos nodded. Gabriel was instrumental. We couldn't have done it without him. Damian looked around before lowering his voice. I've discovered terrible things, Carlos. Your company, or at least a part of it, was being used for something much bigger than we imagined. The Circle? So you already know. Damian looked surprised. Yes, an organization that calls itself The Circle. Marcos Rodriguez is just one of the mid-level operators, but there are much more powerful people involved. Damian discreetly slid a flash drive across the table. It's all here. Financial records, internal communications, lists of children. Enough to dismantle the entire operation if it reaches the right authorities. How did you get that? Renata Suarez, Damian replied. Before she left, she collected documents and hid them. I followed the clues she left in the company. Records. She was smart, she knew she was in danger, and she left a trail for anyone who knew where to look. Carlos felt a wave of admiration for the woman he had barely known, but who had been strong enough to face powerful people, even knowing the risks. "There's one more thing you need to know," Damian continued. "Alejandra got a phone call yesterday. Someone threatened to reveal secrets about you if she cooperated with any investigation. She's scared. Carlos felt his blood run cold. I need to talk to her, make sure she's protected. I've already taken care of that. I put private security at her house. Trustworthy people who are not connected to the company." "Thank you." Carlos put the flash drive in his pocket. "What about Rodriguez?" "He disappeared. He emptied his accounts yesterday and hasn't been seen since." "He knows we're after him," Carlos concluded. "We need to act fast." As he left the cafe, Carlos didn't notice the man watching him from the opposite corner, talking discreetly on the phone. At the farm, Gabriel and Isabella had developed a surprisingly comfortable routine within a few hours. Teresa found them in the kitchen, where Gabriel was teaching Isabella how to play a card game he had learned on the streets. "If you pay attention to the cards that have already come out, you can guess the next ones," he explained patiently. "Isn't that cheating?" Isabella asked, frowning. Gabriel smiled slightly. "No, it's just using your brain. On the streets, you learn to use every advantage you can." Teresa watched the interaction between the siblings with tenderness. Gabriel's initial distrust was gradually giving way to something more open, especially with Isabella, whose genuine innocence seemed to disarm his defenses. "Your father called," Teresa announced, gently interrupting the moment. "He's on his way back. He said he has important news." "Did he find the bandits?" Isabella asked, her eyes still carrying a hint of fear. "I don't know, dear, but it seemed hopeful." Gabriel collected the letters methodically. "What happens next, when this is all over?" The question hung in the air, loaded with unspoken meaning. What would happen to Gabriel when the crisis was over? Where would he belong? "That depends on a number of things," Teresa replied carefully, "but mainly on what you want, Gabriel." The boy pocketed the deck, his movements precise and controlled. "I've never had many choices before." "Now you do," Teresa assured him. "And your father wants you to be a part of his life." "He barely knows me," Gabriel argued, his voice low so Isabella, now distracted by the cat, wouldn't hear. "How can you want that?" "Sometimes people know what's important the moment they see it," Teresa replied. "Your father lost 10 years of his life. I don't think he wants to lose another day." The sound of a car approaching interrupted their conversation. Teresa was immediately alert. "Carlos wouldn't be here so soon," she muttered, going to the window. Her face paled. "It's not him." Gabriel reacted instantly, pulling Isabella away from the window. "How many?" "2 men. I don't recognize the car." Teresa turned to the children, controlled panic in her voice. "To the basement, now." The farmhouse's basement had been converted into an emergency shelter years earlier, when Teresa's brother had worked as an investigative journalist. It had a secondary exit that led to the woods adjacent to the property. "And you?" Gabriel asked, as he guided Isabella to the hidden staircase. "I'm going to distract them. Buy time until Carlos arrives." Teresa was already taking out her cell phone to warn Carlos. "Don't leave unless I give the agreed signal. 3 knocks, followed by 2. Gabriel hesitated, clearly reluctant to let Teresa face the danger alone. "Go," she insisted. "Your sister needs you now." These words seemed to decide the matter. Gabriel nodded gravely, disappearing with Isabella through the secret passage. In the dark basement, lit only by a dim bulb, Isabella clung to her brother's arm. "Who are they, Gabriel?" he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "Bad people," he replied, truthfully, "but they won't find us here." Isabella rested her head on Gabriel's shoulder, seeking comfort. "I'm scared." "I know." Gabriel hesitated before putting his arm around his sister's shoulders, the gesture protective yet awkward, but sincere. "But I'll take care of you. I promise." Above them, they could hear muffled voices, heavy footsteps, something breaking. Isabella shivered and Gabriel pulled her closer. "When I was in that place," Isabella murmured, "I thought I would never see Papa again. Nor Mama." "But you saw it," Gabriel replied, trying to sound reassuring. And you will see it again. Very soon. And you? Isabella looked up at her brother's face. You're going to stay with us, aren't you? Gabriel didn't know what to say. His entire life had been defined by survival day to day, with no plans for the future. The idea of belonging to a family, of having a permanent place, was simultaneously enticing and frightening. Isabella, he began, unsure of how to explain the complexity of his feelings. Please, she insisted, her eyes pleading. Daddy's been so lonely since Mommy left, and I've always wanted a big brother. Gabriel felt something break inside him, a last defense, perhaps, against hope. Before he could respond, there was a loud thud from upstairs, followed by silence. The next few minutes were the longest of Gabriel's life. He kept Isabella behind him, close to the secret exit, ready to flee at the slightest sign of danger. His heart was pounding in his chest, but outwardly he remained calm for Isabella's sake. Finally, they heard the signal. 3 knocks, followed by 2. "Teresa?" Gabriel called cautiously. "It's me," the familiar voice replied. "It's all right." Now, Gabriel hesitated, still suspicious. What was the name of the cat Isabella found today? There was a pause. She didn't give him a name, she just said he looked like you. Only then did Gabriel open the basement door, finding Teresa visibly shaken but unharmed. "What happened?" he asked, as Isabella ran to hug the woman. "Your father arrived in time," Teresa explained, along with his friend Damian and some police officers. Upstairs they found Carlos talking tensely, with Damian and a police officer. 2 men were being loaded into a patrol car. "Daddy!" Isabella shouted, running into Carlos's arms. "Thank God you're both okay," Carlos murmured, hugging his daughter tightly while extending his other arm to Gabriel. After a moment of hesitation, the boy stepped closer, allowing himself to be included in the family embrace. "Who were they?" Gabriel asked, watching the car drive away. "Rodriguez's men," Damian replied. "But we arrived before they could do anything." "How did you know they would come here?" Teresa asked. "I realized I was being followed as I left the cafe," Carlos explained. "I called Damian immediately, who was already prepared with the police." "And now?" "Now," replied Carlos with renewed determination, "we end this once and for all." The following days passed in a whirlwind of testimonies, evidence handed over and arrests made. The scandal involving the Circle exploded in the media, revealing a child trafficking network that spanned multiple countries. The house was closed and dozens of children were rescued. Marcos Rodriguez was captured trying to cross the border and, confronted with the evidence, began to inform on other members of the organization in exchange for a reduced sentence. Carlos, with the guidance of child rights experts, began the process to officially obtain legal custody of Gabriel. DNA confirmed paternity, but years of abandonment, even if involuntary, complicated the process. A week after Isabella's rescue, the Valente family gathered for the first time at Alejandra's house. Carlos's ex-wife, after the initial surprise, was exceptionally welcoming to Gabriel. "He has your stubborn chin," she commented to Carlos as they watched Gabriel and Isabella in the garden, "and the same determined look." "Thank you for understanding," Carlos replied, genuinely grateful for Alejandra's support. "I'm not doing this for you," she replied frankly. "I'm doing it for Gabriel, and for Isabella, who clearly already adores him." In the garden, Isabella proudly showed off her shell collection to Gabriel, who listened with polite attention. The girl still had occasional nightmares, but the therapy was helping, and her brother's constant presence seemed to provide additional security. "How is he adapting?" Alejandra asked. Carlos sighed. "It's hard. 10 years on the streets doesn't disappear overnight. He still hides food in his room, checks the exits of every place we enter, has nightmares." He paused. "But there is progress. Yesterday, he asked me to teach him how to play chess." "Give it time," Alejandra advised. "Building trust takes time." As they talked, Teresa arrived for a visit. Over the past few days, she had become a constant presence, helping Gabriel transition into his new life and providing a link to his past. "I brought something for Gabriel," she announced, handing Carlos a small box. It belonged to Renata. I think he should have it. Inside the box were photographs, letters, and a small diary. Memories of the mother Gabriel had lost so young. "Thank you," Carlos murmured, overcome with emotion. "That means a lot." Teresa smiled sadly. "Renata would be the first to approve of Gabriel being with you now. Despite everything, she never said anything bad about you to him. She just said that one day, perhaps, your paths would cross." In the garden, Gabriel had allowed Isabella to place a makeshift flower crown on his head, a sign of surrender to his sister's cheerful persistence. "When are you going back to school, Isa?" Gabriel asked, adjusting the crown so it wouldn't fall off. "Next week," she replied, grimacing, "but only if you come with me." Gabriel frowned. "Me? At school?" "Of course. Dad is already organizing everything. You're super smart, you'll quickly learn what you missed." The boy looked simultaneously alarmed and flattered. The idea of attending a normal school, with routines and rules, was as foreign as the idea of sleeping in a soft bed every night or having 3 guaranteed meals a day. "I don't know if I'll fit in," he confessed, absently plucking a blade of grass. "Everyone feels that way sometimes," Isabella replied, with surprising wisdom. "Even me when I changed schools after Mom and Dad split up." Gabriel thought about this for a moment. "How did you get over it?" "One day at a time," she replied simply. "And now I have you to protect me from the bullies." Gabriel smiled, a genuine smile that was starting to appear more often. "Always," he promised. From the balcony, Carlos watched the interaction with a full heart. The road ahead would still be long and challenging. Gabriel would need time, patience, and a lot of therapy to process his traumas. Isabella would also carry the scars of her brief but intense captivity. But for the first time in a long time, Carlos felt genuine hope for the future. His family, though patchwork and unconventional, was finally complete. Teresa approached, following his gaze. "Do you know what Gabriel told me yesterday?" she commented. "That for the first time in his life he's not planning escape routes. He said he's finally found a place he doesn't want to run away from." Carlos felt tears in his eyes. "Thank you for helping bring my son back to me." "It wasn't me," Teresa replied softly. "It was Isabella. And it was you, accepting him exactly as he is." That night after a family dinner, Carlos found Gabriel sitting on the porch watching the stars. The boy occasionally raised his hand as if trying to reach them. "My mother used to say that the stars are windows in the sky," Gabriel commented, as Carlos sat down next to him. "That through them, we can see the light of what we have lost." Carlos followed her gaze to the night sky. "She was a very wise woman." "Yes, it was." Gabriel hesitated before continuing. "She also said that no matter how dark the night, there would always be stars to guide us home." "And you found your way," Carlos replied softly. Gabriel turned to face him, his eyes reflecting the brightness of the stars. "We found each other." Carlos extended his arm, and this time Gabriel didn't hesitate to accept the hug, leaning against the father he had just met, but who seemed to have waited a lifetime to meet him. In the living room, Isabella watched through the window, a smile lighting up her face as she silently witnessed the scene. Her family was different now, bigger, more complex, marked by difficult experiences, but also stronger, united by the love that had survived separations, secrets, and traumas. And as the sky darkened over Buenos Aires, 3 hearts finally began to beat in unison, the rhythm of a new beginning.